I think the engineers did a great job designing the MX-5, but there are a few improvements that are available, and this video will highlight one of the more visually appealing changes that can be made. Join me today in making one of those changes. I'm unboxing a set of LED sequential turn signals for the rear of the MX-5 ND model. This kit comes packaged for a truly plug-and-play installation. I realize that some people are not comfortable with removing parts off their new cars. But if you stick with me, you might gain enough confidence with the information presented here so that anyone can tackle this somewhat easy installation. After all, if I can do it, so can you. The tools necessary today will be a 10mm socket with extension and ratchet, a small flat blade screwdriver, and a Phillips screwdriver. The procedure begins by removing the hard plastic trunk liner from the very back of the car. It's held in place with 4 retainer clips, and I'm just using the small screwdriver to pop those out. Once the clips have been removed, I can separate the hard plastic from the carpeted pieces. The last thing I must do before removing the panel is to disconnect the trunk light assembly from the power lead. Now I'll remove the panel and store it safely. In order to remove the carpeted sections, I'll have to remove 5 of these clips. The first 3 you see here are on the side of the trunk. There's one at the very bottom. And finally, this last one, which was hidden by the hard plastic liner right by the trunk light assembly. Where now I'm going to remove the trunk liner from the left-hand side. This gives me access to all the wiring and all the fasteners I need to get to. Using the 10mm socket, I'm going to remove the small nut that holds the taillight assembly to the frame. Next is disconnecting the electrical connection. And the third thing, I'm going to push this rubber grommet through the hole into the cavity behind the taillight. I'm going to need access to this hole shortly. Here I'm removing the Phillips head screw from the top of the flange for the taillight assembly. I'm going to take my thumb and push it through the hole that the grommet used to be in, just to give the taillight assembly a good solid push straight back. This is a different camera angle of the same procedure. The 10mm nut has been removed, the top screw has been removed, and now I'm going to push the taillight assembly using my thumb through the grommet hole directly back. One good solid push, and it pops right out. I'm very careful here not to touch the paint with the taillight housing. And this clip is the reason why I push it straight back. The clip lines up with the opening in the back of the housing, and it comes out only one way, 90 degrees straight back. If it's twisted off, it could break, and that would be expensive. This index pin on the lamp housing is sandwiched between 2 stops, one stop at the locked position and the other stop at the unlocked position. I'm taking a note of where the black wire is towards the top. I'm pretty sure you can't install it any other way, but just to be sure, I took a mental note. The package comes complete with a pair of LED strips, new wiring pigtails, and a pair of resistors. The resistors are necessary in the circuit because the LED strips do not draw as much current as the incandescent bulb does, so the turn signal circuit will act like the bulb is burnt out and will flash rapidly. So these resistors will help prevent this hyper flash situation. After removing the bulb, I'm using my favorite silicone spray to rub on the rubber grommet and the bulb connector O-ring. The silicone will not only prolong the life of the rubber, it will also act like a lubricant, making installation so much easier. This next step seemed to be the trickiest out of all of them. This is a small circuit board that's very fragile, so you do have to use the hands of a surgeon and not the paws of a gorilla to install this. Be very gentle. It can only go in one way. And once the lock tab is in the locked position, you know that everything is gone. And it takes a bit of finagling, but once it's locked in place, it's in the correct position. With the work on the taillight complete, I'm now going to start to work on the wiring inside the trunk. I'm using some isopropyl alcohol to clean the area where the resistor pad will be sitting. I've chosen this spot as the place the resistor pack will be located. The resistors have a tendency to heat up, so this spot is far enough away from the carpeting as not to cause any concerns with that heat. I can imagine a situation where I have my hazard lights flashing for a long period of time. There could be a large buildup of heat. So here I'm removing the protective covering from the sticky tape. I've only got one shot at this. It doesn't come off easy, so just making sure it's in the right spot and it's nice and secure. The supplied pigtail comes with one large white connector, one small white connector, and one tiny black connector. The small white connector goes into the power supply from the car, and the tiny black connector gets connected to the resistor circuit. And here's a view of the connection so far. The empty connector is for the taillight pigtail. The installation of the taillight is just the reverse of the removal steps. I just make sure that the corner snaps into place and the top hole for the screw lines up. Now this is a metal screw going into a plastic piece, so I'm ensuring that I'm not over tightening this. I'm pulling on the grommet to seat it back into the hole. I'm careful to pull on the grommet and not just the wires themselves. And here's the final electrical connection. The last part of the taillight installation is the 10mm nut. The stud is attached into the plastic housing, so over-tightening is a concern. I just made sure it was snug. And now to the right-hand side. Removal of the top clip first, and then the door hiding the jack and handle. Now I'm just going to remove the 10mm nut. Because the jack is in position on this side of the car, there is a slight difference in the location of the electrical connectors, but they are virtually the same as the left-hand side. The electrical connector is undone, and I'll push the grommet through the hole into the cavity behind the taillight housing. Removing the Phillips head screw from the top. And here, inserting my thumb through the grommet hole to push the assembly straight back. So I'm noting again which side the black wire is. It's to the top of the housing. Applying my favorite silicone product to the rubber. And carefully inserting the circuit board with the LEDs facing towards the lenses. This part of the install is really the tricky part. What I'm doing is actually bending the circuit board to fit inside the housing. It does take a lot of patience and care as it's quite fragile. But once the index pin is in the lock position, the install is complete. I found a spot for the resistors to mount on this side, so a cleaning with IPA to ensure proper adhesion is needed. The right-hand side taillight assembly is going to go together just like the left-hand side did. A nice gentle push on the corner, the Phillips head screw on the top, and the 10mm nut tightened up. Once that's done, the electrical connectors are next. The test of the system proved successful, so now I just put the trunk linings back together again. I'll admit this project had its challenges, but it definitely has given the car an improved look and was well worth the cost and effort. What do you think? Thank you for joining me today behind the red door.